You know the old poem, April showers bring May birthdays. Okay, maybe that's not how it goes, but it is time for Patreon May birthday shoutouts. And I want to send very warm birthday greetings to Aria, Carly, Ellie, Anne, Rachel, Leah, Emily Rose, Helen, Melissa, Antoinette, Patty, Laura, and Kate. I hope your day, your month, your year is filled with joy, laughter, and wonderful memories. Have a piece of cake for me, and happy birthday. Stephen Watkins showed up to pick his daughter up for court-ordered visitation just 2 days before Thanksgiving in 2008. The following day was a court hearing where he hoped to get more parenting time, but that hearing would not happen. What happened instead is a matter of debate. I'm Charlie, and welcome to Crimelines. Welcome to Crimelines, another week, another episode. Can you believe it's been 5 years of Crimelines? I launched Crimelines on May 5th, 2019, not sure how I was going to manage a weekly show all by myself after having a co-host for almost 3 years. It is a lot of work, and while I've had help here and there, and I've taken occasional breaks, I'm back to producing weekly shows, plus bonus content for Patreon and Apple subscriptions, completely by myself. I've actually been making Crimelines by myself longer than I made my other show with a co-host. Now, anyone who knows me knows that I'm prone to hyperbole, but it's definitely not hyperbole to say that this has been life-changing. And I know that Crimelines is nothing without people listening. People who are recommending the show to a friend or on social media or supporting me even directly through Patreon and Apple. Plus, those who give me feedback. Recently on Facebook, a listener named Lee mentioned in a comment that my delivery has really improved as I've become more comfortable, and I appreciate that because that's the thing I've really been working on. And I've been working on it because of the feedback I have gotten about my delivery and cadence, and so it's nice to know that that work has been noticed. So I just want to say thank you to everyone because a show does not get to 5 years just because the host didn't quit. It's also a celebration for the listeners who have shown up all of these weeks and weeks and weeks I've been doing episodes and allowed this to be my primary job, which is why I can create so much content. So with that, big thank you to everyone. Let's go ahead and get into today's case. We are starting with Stephen Watkins, who was born in February of 1976 to Dale and Penny Watkins. He grew up in Chandler, Illinois, population 600. His upbringing in this little town was pretty idyllic. He had great parents, he had a little sister he adored, and lots of friends and cousins everywhere. It's the type of a life that some people dream of, but like a lot of people who grew up in a small town, Stephen did want to see more of the world. So he ended up enlisting in the Coast Guard after high school. Around the time Stephen was leaving for his service, he found out that his girlfriend was pregnant. She gave birth to a little girl who we will call Emma. There are actually 2 minor children involved in the story, and I'm going to be changing both of their names for their privacy. While Stephen was stationed in Virginia, Emma's mom would take her out to see him pretty regularly until she was about 2 years old. At that point, she realized that Stephen could provide Emma with more stability than she could, so she voluntarily gave him full custody. Stephen loved being a dad. It was his purpose in life. And when he finished with the Coast Guard, he moved back home so he could raise Emma near family in the same environment he grew up in. He ended up moving so close to his family that his house was right behind his parents. As a single dad, that was a huge help to have them nearby. Stephen got a job with the state working for the Department of Health Care and Family Services. He was basically answering the phone, advising people regarding their child support. The job was in Springfield. It was a bit of a commute, so Steven's life was basically going to work and raising Emma. He didn't have much time for anything else. One day, several months into his new job, Steven noticed a woman walking through the parking lot at work. She didn't work for the state, but the company she did work for shared the same parking lot. Steven was interested in getting to know her, so he started holding back a bit when he would get to work to wait for her so that he could strike up a conversation as they made their way across the parking lot. He learned her name was Jennifer Webster, but what he didn't know was that she mentioned him to her family because she knew he was interested in her. Eventually, Steven did ask Jennifer out, and she said yes. From the first date, the relationship was full on. There was no slow build. Within 2 weeks of that first date, Jennifer brought him to church to meet her family. For Jennifer's family, this was a big deal. They were tight-knit, like Steven's family, but according to the reporting, they were close to the point of almost being insular. Jennifer, her parents, and her grandparents all lived together, and the extended family had family dinner together almost every night, and they all attended the same church. It was so hard for an outsider to break into that family, according to Dateline, that Jennifer's first husband didn't last long. He found it to be too much of an us versus them mentality, and he was a them, so the marriage ended. Steven would also experience the us versus them mentality, but not right away. Jennifer seemed charmed by his daughter Emma, who was around 7 years old, and her family was very sweet with her. Steven had such a wonderful childhood himself with 2 parents and a sibling that he really wanted that for Emma. So Jennifer being ready to accept him and Emma as a package deal really made him fall head over heels. Things moved quickly. They married within the first 2 months of their relationship, which worried both sides of the family. Steven's mom thought things were moving too fast, but she held her tongue. She didn't want to put a cloud over Steven's happiness. Jennifer's Uncle Ed, though, disapproved enough that he didn't even go to the wedding, which, from my understanding, was a pretty bold statement in this family since they did everything together. After the wedding, the two moved into a house in Ashland, Illinois. That's about 30 minutes from where Steven grew up, but it was just down the street from where Jennifer had been living with her grandparents and her parents. And in line with everything in this relationship moving fast, Jennifer was soon pregnant. This pregnancy marked a shift in the relationship, according to Steven's family, though everything had moved so fast in the relationship that it's hard to say that if it was the pregnancy that was the root of the change, or just the fact that they were finally getting to know each other, and maybe it just wasn't working out. The first thing Steven told his parents about the shift in attitude was towards Emma. It wasn't necessarily Jennifer at first, but her extended family. When they had first gotten together, they all treated Emma just like any other grandchild. But after Jennifer got pregnant and was having a biological grandchild, they didn't see Emma quite the same way. According to what Steven's family told Dateline, Emma was really upset when someone in Jennifer's family told her she wasn't really part of the family. Jennifer's family was being, according to Steven, outright exclusionary, and Jennifer was doing the same, but in smaller ways. She would prefer to be around her family rather than with Steven and Emma, and Steven first thought that maybe it was because of the pregnancy. It was Jennifer's first baby, and they had only been married a few months after even less time spent dating and getting to know each other. So it seemed natural that Jennifer would lean heavily on her family for support. And Steven was pretty confident that they would be able to get back on track as their own family unit after the baby was born. In June of 2007, which was 10 months after they got married and about a year after they started dating, Jennifer and Steven had a baby girl who we are going to call Lily. If Steven really thought things were going to change at this point, he was soon proven wrong. More than ever, Jennifer just wanted to be around her family, with her baby, of course. Stephen would get home from work and Jennifer would pack Lily up and go down to her parents' house for the evening. They would do all the normal routine things over there. They'd have dinner, give Lily a bath, and then Jennifer would come back pretty much just in time to put her to bed. Stephen tried to work with Jennifer on this. He would talk to her about prioritizing their family over her family of origin, but it became clear that just was not going to happen. Stephen told his parents that he thought the only way he and Emma would get to be in Lily's life in any meaningful way was if he divorced Jennifer and the court gave him parenting time. Imagine where Stephen's mind is at this point. He wanted more time with his child to be a more involved parent, and the only path forward that he could see to accomplish that was a divorce. The couple separated with Stephen consulting a divorce attorney about custody in early 2008. Jennifer moved with the baby back in with her family. In May of 2008, Stephen filed for divorce when Lily was 11 months old. He could not get Jennifer to agree to a regular visitation schedule between the two of them, so he needed the courts involved. And when he filed, he asked for primary custody. Jennifer then called the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services and reported that Stephen had been sexually abusing his daughters. We don't know all that was exactly in that complaint, nor should we when we're talking about a child, but Jennifer's family later told the State Journal Register what they witnessed and what they were calling sexual abuse. I would normally never say what happened in any detail when there's a surviving victim, particularly when it's besides the point of the case we're discussing. But I am going to say this now because accusations can linger even when someone is cleared, and what they described was not abuse. The family said that Stephen, during diaper changes, would tickle Lily above her pubic bone, aka her stomach, while saying the words, "naked baby time." In court, Stephen admitted to doing this because why wouldn't he? That's not sexual abuse. And eventually, the investigation would agree with this, but in the meantime, Stephen was given supervised visits with Lily so that they could investigate the claims. During these supervised visits, Jennifer would generally take the baby over to Stephen's house for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and Stephen complained that at these visits, she would largely try to keep him and Emma from interacting or playing with Lily. By the end of the summer of 2008, Stephen had been cleared of the false accusations against him, and he was given court-ordered unsupervised visits with Lily. He showed up to them as scheduled for every single visit, and in a show of good faith, he would invite Jennifer to come along if they were doing something special, like when he took the girls to the pumpkin patch. He didn't want this to be a contentious divorce or custody battle. He wanted them to have a functional family relationship, even if they weren't together, because that's what would benefit Lily in the long term. And according to Stephen's family, he may have been holding out some hope that Jennifer would see how good things could be when they were together as a family. But while Jennifer would take his olive branch when it meant going along with Lily on the visits, she never extended one of her own. Her own divorce attorney would later say that Jennifer did not want Stephen to see Lily at all. She basically wanted to move on with her daughter and cut ties. Stephen, however, loved both of his daughters, and that was not going to happen. He kept showing up to his court-ordered visits, and after about a month of this new schedule, Jennifer started canceling. Sometimes he would go over there to pick Lily up, and they wouldn't be home. Other times, Lily was sick and couldn't go. On Thursday, October 30th, 2008, Stephen went to pick Lily up as scheduled. He was supposed to have her 2 evenings a week, and then he would have time with her every other weekend. When he got to the house, he was told that Lily was sick and they were at the doctor. Stephen decided to call the police. An officer came out to the house, and Stephen showed him the court order for visitation and explained that the family kept denying him access to his daughter. So the officer knocked on the door while he had Stephen stay on the other side of the street. Jennifer's grandfather, Kenneth Skinner, and her father, Bob Webster, answered the door together. The officer said he was called out there because they had denied visitation to the father, and then both men started yelling, not at the officer, but they were shouting across the street at Stephen. The officer noted that Stephen did not respond at all. The men finally told the officer that Lily had been sick and she was at the doctor. And that meant there really wasn't anything more the police could do at that point. And I know that's really frustrating for people. When you have a court order, it should be enforceable. The police will show up and try to mediate the situation, but without a warrant, they can't enter the home and just get the child. And even if they could, is that really in the child's best interest to be removed from the home by force? Basically, Stephen was told this was a matter for the family court. And Stephen's plan was to continue to show up for visits, document when the visit is denied, and then bring all of that before the judge at their next hearing, which was scheduled for November 26th, 2008. The judge had already indicated that he expected to expand Stephen's visitation to include overnight visits, but who knows what the judge would do when he found out that Jennifer had been defying the current court order. Not following a court order isn't just seen as something you're doing against the other parent. You're doing it against the judge. You're going against the court. And judges don't like that. This was really not going to look good for Jennifer in court, on top of the unfounded abuse claims. The evening before this hearing, on November 25th, Stephen had a scheduled visit, and as always, he showed up to pick up 17-month-old Lily. With court the next day, I'm sure he thought Jennifer would comply with the visitation schedule, if only to look good for the judge. Then, at around 5:30 that evening, a 911 call came in. It was Jennifer, very upset, saying that her grandmother, 73-year-old Shirley Skinner, needed help. She said that her husband came in the house to pick up their daughter, and he went after Shirley. Then he turned and went after her and the baby, and he was on the floor, shot. The 911 dispatcher repeated, "You say she shot?" And Jennifer replied, "No. He shot, and she needed an ambulance for her grandmother, who had been pushed and had heart trouble." This was a confusing call. Jennifer was saying that someone was shot, but the help that was needed was for someone with heart problems. She was upset, so the dispatcher took her at face value and dispatched EMS to the house on the report that there was an elderly woman having heart problems. The first two people at the scene were volunteer paramedics whose duty was to render first aid until the ambulance could get there. The first one on the scene said that there were a few people in the house who waved him inside. He saw Shirley Skinner pacing in the kitchen pretty frantically, while Jennifer and Shirley's husband, Kenneth, were standing near her, trying to calm her down. Lily was with Jennifer. When Shirley saw the paramedic, she said, "I shot him. Is he dead?" Now, this guy stands there a little confused. Shirley repeated it several times and then pointed to the floor. Only then did he see 32-year-old Stephen Watkins lying face down. He was dead, having been shot once in the back of the head, and there was just nothing they could do for him. I don't know if you've heard about this, but the flavored air category is quickly becoming the leading alternative to vaping and smoking. It's really a whole new movement towards better habits, led by the sponsor of today's episode, Fume. When you perform a habit, good or bad, your brain forms neural pathways associated with that behavior. That means breaking a habit requires you to either rewire these pathways or substituting the habit with something better. With flavored air, you can satisfy your oral fixation through a passive diffusion system that utilizes no electronics, vapor, or combustion. Fume is an award-winning flavored air device, and if you think of vapor as a sticky soda, Fume cores are much closer to refreshing herbal teas. And Fume has a lot of delicious flavors out there for every palate. Personally, orange vanilla is my favorite. There is no vapor, so you can use it anywhere, and the flavors are non-toxic. I appreciate that Fume continuously invests in third-party studies to ensure the safety of their products. I love the look of the Fume, but I loved it even more when I pulled it out of the box and felt that weighted design that makes it very comfortable to hold. They've also made it with fidgeting in mind, which I appreciate as a fidgeter. It really does help keep my hands busy. Fume has served over 300,000 customers, and you can be the next success story. For a limited time, use my code Crimelines to get a free gift with your journey pack. Head to tryfume.com, that's try, F-U-M.com, and use code Crimelines to get a free gift with your order today. One of the questions that would linger in this case was Jennifer's 911 call. Stephen had been shot, so why did she call an ambulance for Shirley being in distress? Wouldn't you call it for the person who had a significantly more urgent medical need? Since there was nothing that could be done for Stephen, the paramedic tried to see if Shirley needed treatment. And she first denied having any medical issues. Her daughter, though, Jennifer's mother, Deborah, jumped in and said she did have heart problems. The only injuries the paramedics saw on Shirley were 2 parallel scratches between her thumb and forefinger. There was some dried blood around them, but no bruising. Shirley was upset and just kept saying things like he shouldn't have come in here. At one point, Shirley pointed to a broken sconce on the wall and said that she had been pushed into it. There was another paramedic at the scene, and their report is very similar to this one, so I think we have a pretty good idea of what the people in the house were doing and saying in the aftermath of this. All Jennifer said at the scene was basically what she said on the 911 call. Stephen forced his way in, he pushed Shirley, and then he started to make his way towards her and Lily. Then Shirley grabbed a gun that was on a shelf near the TV and shot him. At some point in all of this, someone in the house called an attorney, and Shirley was seen talking on the phone. She then handed the phone to someone else and simply said, "I shouldn't have done this." The ambulance arrived, and Shirley was taken to the hospital for observation since she was agitated and short of breath. On the ride to the hospital, her daughter Deborah was with her and just kept telling Shirley not to say anything else. And that was the entire family's decision going forward. Aside from Jennifer's vague statement and Shirley's agitated confession, they were giving nothing. No one in the house would say who shot Stephen or why. They wouldn't even clarify who was in the house when it happened. So this left the Ashland police to investigate if this was murder or self-defense. And when I say the Ashland police, I mean that in the singular. Ashland, with a population of around 11 or 1,200 people, only had one full-time police officer, the chief, and he had never investigated a homicide before. So there were a lot of things that were not done immediately, likely due to his inexperience. He was never able to fully ascertain how many people were in the house at the time of the shooting. He knew it was at least Jennifer, her daughter, her grandmother, and her grandfather. Deborah was there when the paramedics arrived, but that's not to say she was there the whole time. The chief also did not do gunshot residue tests on anyone, and that's probably because Shirley admitted to having shot Stephen. But she was also agitated and in distress, and a GSR test might have helped definitively put the gun in her hand. Now, speaking of her hand, no one took pictures of Shirley's injury. Though the chief was well-meaning, he tried unsuccessfully to work the case for months before he called the state in to help. He came to believe through his investigation that this was not a case of self-defense or defense of another, and the murder investigation needed more experienced investigators from the state's attorney's office. There were reasons not to believe a self-defense claim. For one, Stephen had the upper hand going into the hearing the next day. The judge had already indicated he would be giving him more visitation, and Stephen had been following the orders to the letter while Jennifer had not. Why would he risk his pretty easy court win by assaulting Shirley and going after Jennifer? Why didn't Stephen do what he had done in the past, which was call the police and have it documented? There was also very little evidence of a physical altercation at the scene. Shirley said, quote, "He should not have come in here," which indicated he hadn't been invited in. But there was no damage to the door and things were not knocked over in the entryway like he pushed open the door to barge in. All they had was that broken wall sconce. The sconce was still attached to the wall, but 3 posts that came out of it were all broken and dangling by the wires. A visual examination of the fixture showed no blood on it, and Shirley also didn't have any corresponding injuries. Had she been pushed into the fixture hard enough to break off 3 poles, wouldn't she at least have a bruise from it? And not to mention that the sconce appeared to be about 5.5 feet up the wall. Shirley stood just 5 feet tall. Now maybe she got pushed and her hands flailed up and her hand hit the sconce, breaking all 3 poles and giving her 2 scrapes. To me, that seems like something worth following up on to rule it in or out. But like I said, the injury wasn't photographed and they couldn't go back and reconstruct it. To the investigators, they believe that the sconce had either already been broken or it was broken in some attempt to stage it. It seemed much more likely that the injuries to the webbing of Shirley's thumb and forefinger were from the gun used to shoot Stephen. It was a 9mm Glock, and the scrapes could have been from the slide. It's a common enough injury, particularly for people not used to handling a gun like that it has a name, slide bite. And Shirley was definitely not used to shooting that gun or really any gun. That's not to say she never shot a gun before, but she wasn't an avid shooter, and the gun was Jennifer's. She had bought it many years before, and the family kept it loaded on a shelf near the television, which was why Shirley was able to so easily and quickly grab it. I have to say, for an inexperienced shooter, this was quite the shot. Based on the little information that Shirley and Jennifer gave, it looks like Shirley took the shot at 15 to 20 feet, and she hit Stephen right in the back of his head, instantly killing him. So it seemed to the investigators that there were 2 possible scenarios here. One was it happened the way Shirley and Jennifer said. Stephen barged in, pushed Shirley into the wall, and went for Jennifer when he was killed. Or he had been led into the house, and when his back was turned, someone in the house executed him to keep him from getting custody of Lily. With the missteps in the early investigation, it seemed like they would never be able to prove which it was. But then the investigators learned about something else that happened that day as Jennifer prepped for the custody hearing. Jennifer's mother, Deborah, hired a private investigator to supervise Stephen picking Lily up. He said that he was told Stephen would be there around 4:45 in the afternoon, and what they were looking for from the PI was third-party documentation. Deborah said that Lily would really carry on, crying and wetting herself whenever she was around Stephen, and they wanted that documented to bring to court. But at 3:30 that day, Deborah called the PI and canceled. She told him not to come by and they didn't need his services. The family was not talking to the police, so they couldn't ask Deborah about this. But down the road, in a bit of an attempt to defend herself and her family in the media, Deborah told the State Journal-Register that she canceled because a child psychologist advised them that evidence of a hired PI observing a crying child wouldn't really help in court. And the fact that it wouldn't help in court was true. Lily was 17 months old at that point, and that's really the peak of separation anxiety. It would have been normal for her to cry when she had to separate from her primary caretaker, and a judge probably wouldn't consider it. So maybe that was the reason Deborah canceled the PI, and maybe if she explained that to the police early on, they would have found it a reasonable enough explanation. But she didn't. She didn't say it until 2 years later. So to the investigators, looking at this case without that added explanation, it looked like Deborah knew something was going to happen that night, and she didn't want a witness. The initial plan may have been to go to court with the PI's evidence to try to keep Stephen from getting custody, but at some point that day, the plan changed. And if that was true, that the plan changed to murder, this was a conspiracy. It seemed pretty clear at that point that if Shirley was forced to defend herself, she would mount a self-defense or a defense of another claim. And the investigators decided that she could argue that in court. So on October 5th, 2009, 10 months after Stephen's death, 74-year-old Shirley Skinner was arrested. She and her husband, along with Jennifer and Lily, had moved down to their Florida vacation home in Lake Seminole, and that is where she was arrested. At the time they took Shirley into custody for the murder of Stephen Watkins, the police said that more arrests were possible. Shirley waived extradition, so within days, she was back in Illinois, locked up on a $5 million bond. Then, in December of 2009, the grand jury indicted her on additional charges related to attempting to hire two of her employees in their family business to commit the murder. She had told both of them that she would pay $10,000 to have Stephen killed. Her attorney said that this was just an offhanded joke and that if either of the men thought she was serious, they would have gone to the police, which they didn't. But the state countered that both men were employees of Shirley's, which gave them a financial incentive not to come forward. While these criminal charges were pending, Stephen's family, who were still dealing with having just lost him, asked Jennifer if they could visit with Lily, and she refused. There was an attempted offer that Shirley's bond could be lowered in exchange for a visit, and Jennifer still refused. For the state, this just confirmed the entire motive. They believed that Jennifer and her family viewed Lily as a piece of property that belonged to them, and they would do what they had to in order to keep control. As the trial approached, the state had a very clear theory of the crime. Stephen showed up for his visit like usual, but rather than refusing him to see Lily, they invited him to step inside. When he did that, Shirley pulled the gun and shot him from behind in a planned execution. The issue here was going to be that early investigation. How could they prove this is what happened? Shirley told multiple people at the scene that she was the one who shot Stephen, but what if she denied that in court? What independent proof other than her excited utterances did they have? They had injuries to her hand that people saw but were not documented. They didn't have GSR test results. They didn't have fingerprints on the gun, which isn't unusual given the materials in that particular gun. So then they DNA tested it and they found female DNA, but Shirley was excluded as a possible contributor. Jennifer was not excluded, so it could have been her DNA, and since she owned the gun, I think it's probably safe to say it was. But they also found the police chief's DNA, even though he said he never handled the gun without gloves, which then brings up a question of contamination. So the state was confident they knew what happened, but less confident they could prove it in court, so they offered Shirley a deal. If she pleaded out on a lesser charge, she would be sentenced to around 9 years in prison. At 74 years old, she would have a chance of a life of freedom afterwards. But if she went to trial and was convicted, she would spend the rest of her life behind bars. Shirley turned down the deal. So this case went to trial in May of 2010. Jennifer did not attend any of the trial, and she remained living in Florida, resisting all of Stephen's family's efforts to see Lily. They ended up filing a court case for grandparent visitation, which we'll get into later. At Shirley's trial, the state presented the Skinner family as clannish, closed off to outsiders, and possessive of their family members. When Stephen Watkins filed for custody, he was threatening their way of life. When attempts to accuse him of truly disgusting crimes failed, They then tried to block his access to his daughter. But that wasn't getting him to go away, and there was a hearing on the horizon, one that was likely going to go in his favor, so Shirley decided to put an end to it. The defense, they had a strategy that I didn't anticipate. I was 100% sure they were going to present this as a clear-cut defense of another case. They were going to stick Shirley on the stand and have her tearfully explain how terrified she was when Stephen barged through the door, pushed her aside, and then started to go after Jennifer and Lily. She's a small woman who looks every bit the part of a great-grandmother. Now, don't get me wrong, she's a strong lady. She's the matriarch of the family. She was running a family business years past retirement age. But if Jodi Arias's attorneys could make her look mousy, Shirley's could have made her look like a sympathetic, timid old lady. But they didn't. They decided instead to question if she was the shooter. I don't know if you've heard about this, but the flavored air category is quickly becoming the leading alternative to vaping and smoking. It's really a whole new movement towards better habits, led by the sponsor of today's episode, Fume. When you perform a habit, good or bad, your brain forms neural pathways associated with that behavior. That means breaking a habit requires you to either rewire these pathways or substituting the habit with something better. With flavored air, you can satisfy your oral fixation through a passive diffusion system that utilizes no electronics, vapor, or combustion. Fume is an award-winning flavored air device, and if you think of vapor as a sticky soda, Fume cores are much closer to refreshing herbal teas. And Fume has a lot of delicious flavors out there for every palate. Personally, orange vanilla is my favorite. There is no vapor, so you can use it anywhere, and the flavors are non-toxic. I appreciate that Fume continuously invests in third-party studies to ensure the safety of their products. I love the look of the Fume, but I loved it even more when I pulled it out of the box and felt that weighted design that makes it very comfortable to hold. They've also made it with fidgeting in mind, which I appreciate as a fidgeter. It really does help keep my hands busy. Fume has served over 300,000 customers, and you can be the next success story. For a limited time, use my code Crimelines to get a free gift with your journey pack. Head to tryfume.com, that's try, F-U-M.com, and use code Crimelines to get a free gift with your order today. So that's why I went through all those gaps in the investigation. The only forensic evidence we have, the DNA, made it possible that it was Jennifer holding the gun. And the defense really used that. They pointed out that there were multiple photographs taken of the front door, but zero of Shirley's supposed injuries. And if she had those injuries where the slide scraped her skin to the point that she bled, why was her DNA not on the gun? Additionally, there was a ton of evidence of Jennifer hating Stephen, but none of that applied directly to Shirley. There were no communications between Shirley and Stephen, or really any evidence that she was involved in the divorce proceedings in any way. The only thing that put the gun in Shirley's hands were statements she made while she was having a medical incident after someone was shot in her home. According to the defense, they could not be relied on. The defense chose to call no witnesses, instead covering their case through cross-examination and their closing arguments, where they tried to drive home the point that no one could put the gun in Shirley's hand beyond a reasonable doubt. There was a reasonable alternative suspect, someone whose DNA was likely on the gun and who had all the motive in the world, Jennifer. The jury took the case, and we do know a bit about their deliberations based on interviews later done by students at DePaul University College of Law. It seems the consensus of the jurors was that they were surprised the defense did not put on more of a case. They were unaware that this initially looked like a self-defense case because Shirley didn't testify. No one else in the family testified on her behalf either, which seemed strange to the jury, because certainly someone else in the family knew whether Shirley pulled the trigger or not. They didn't have any character witnesses to let the jury know how unlikely it was for Shirley to have done something so violent, And maybe they didn't put anyone on the stand because it was something Shirley would do, and in fact, did do. After 15 minutes of discussion, they had their first vote, which was 11 guilty, 1 not guilty. They had about 15 more minutes of discussion, followed by a second vote, and this time it was unanimous. Guilty for first-degree murder and solicitation of murder. She was sentenced to 55 years in prison. With Shirley off to prison and Stephen dead, if Jennifer thought her days of battling for custody were over, she was very, very wrong, because Stephen's family wanted visitation with Lily, and they were going to push for it. Now, every state is a bit different when it comes to grandparents' rights to visitation. In Illinois, there are limited circumstances where a grandparent even has the legal standing to ask the court for visitation. If both of the parents of the grandchild agree not to allow a visit, they can't even petition. In this case, though, the Watkins could apply because Stephen was deceased. The hardest step to overcome, though, is that they had to prove that Jennifer was unreasonable in not allowing them to visit, and that the child had experienced harm due to it. The reason this is so difficult to prove is that the baseline going into court is that a parent who is fit enough to raise their child would not choose something that is harming them. But the Watkins were able to prove to this judge that it was harmful for Lily not to visit with them. It seems the main reason was that she would otherwise grow up without learning about her father or hearing positive things about him if she didn't have meaningful visits with his family. This judge had very harsh words for Jennifer. He said he saw evil in her. And he even said he felt sorry for Lily because she had to live with Jennifer. So the Watkins were granted visits. But if you think Jennifer followed this court order any better than she followed the one she had with Stephen, you're sorely mistaken. It wasn't long before Jennifer was refusing visits. And really, around the same time she's refusing these visits, the state had decided they weren't entirely done with the Skinner-Webster family. They did not believe that it was Shirley and only Shirley who planned Stephen's murder. Another grand jury was held in November of 2010, and this time members of the family broke their silence. What they told the grand jury is sealed, but they did speak with the State Journal-Register. Not Jennifer, but Shirley's husband, her daughter Deborah, her son Ed, and her son-in-law. It seems the family realized that staying quiet for 2 years really didn't help them legally because Shirley was now in prison, and it certainly didn't help them in the court of public opinion. They said they didn't talk under the advice of their attorneys, which I can't say is the wrong choice. It was clear the state was looking at this as a conspiracy case, and if you're a suspect in a murder, it's almost always in your best interest to stop talking. The family, though, was divided in what they thought really happened. Shirley's son Ed was, and is, as far as I know, convinced that Jennifer killed Stephen, and Shirley took the rap for her so that custody of Lily would remain with the family. Ed later told Dateline that Jennifer was the golden child in the family, she was the first granddaughter, and she was spoiled from day one. She could be sweet when things went her way, but when she got upset, it turned ugly fast. He said she was entitled and controlling with her behaviors, which we do see in the custody battle over her daughter. Ed absolutely could see Shirley taking the blame for Jennifer because she would do anything for her. Jennifer's mother, Deborah, does not believe that, and neither does Kenneth, Shirley's husband. Deborah said she would never let her mother go to jail for her daughter, but that Shirley shouldn't be in prison either. Shirley was acting to defend the family. But a big issue with what everyone thinks happened is that they all claimed not to have been there. Ed wasn't at the house. Kenneth said he was in another room when he heard Shirley fall and then a gunshot, so he didn't see it. Jennifer would also later claim to have been in another room, apparently hiding from Stephen. And Deborah also wasn't at home. She was possibly at work, though she couldn't remember the exact details 2 years later. Shirley's family also said that contrary to the prosecution's portrayal of Stephen as a kind man who just wanted to be part of his daughter's life, they knew Stephen as someone with a temper, and they repeated that they still believed he had abused his daughter. Stephen's family said in that same article that Stephen was never aggressive towards anyone in his life, and what about shooting someone in the back of the head says self-defense. They believe that Shirley pulled the trigger in a planned murder, and they only had partial justice because only Shirley was in prison. The new grand jury did not lead to additional charges in Stephen's murder, but this was not the end of the legal woes for the family because Jennifer was soon held in contempt for not allowing those court-ordered visits. An arrest warrant was issued for her in March of 2011, and she was jailed in Florida while she fought extradition. Jennifer sat in jail for around 5 months before she was released because Florida failed to extradite her. She was so adamant that Stephen's family not be given a visit that she would rather sit in jail while her family took care of Lily than grant that visit. Also in 2011, Shirley's appeal was heard and she was partially successful. She did not get the first-degree murder charge overturned, but she did get the solicitation conviction tossed out. The appellate court found that the evidence there was really lacking. They had one employee's testimony that was called equivocal and vague, and the second employee who was there for the conversation did not seem to remember the details of it. So Shirley got one conviction tossed out, but because of the other one, she stayed in prison. The following year, in 2012, Stephen's family helped pass a state statute that allows judges to suspend the driver's licenses of parents who refuse to allow court-ordered visitation between their children and their non-custodial parent, and they can also issue a fine. Now, this law makes sense if you think about how Illinois has a similar law for non-payment of child support. If not paying your child support gets you a license suspension, why shouldn't refusing visitation do likewise? Now, this law did have opposition, and there's similar issues that come up with these types of laws for not paying your child support. For one, there are already punitive options for judges, which include jail time and criminal charges. So we should really focus on making the court use the tools they have. The other main argument against these types of laws is that you shouldn't attach driving privileges to something unrelated to driving. In spite of the opposition, the law did pass, but nothing the Watkins did in Illinois would force Florida to successfully enforce the visitation schedule. There was a second attempt to arrest Jennifer in 2013, but at that point, they couldn't find her. Every time they went to the house where she supposedly lived, they said she didn't live there. The Watkins managed maybe 2 phone calls with Lily by calling Deborah's phone, but then that number was disconnected and they had no contact. But then in 2016, Jennifer left Florida. She moved with Lily to Massachusetts to live with a man that she had met at church. Stephen's parents had heard through a mutual friend that Jennifer had moved, so they decided to see if Massachusetts could do what Florida couldn't. A warrant was issued for Jennifer's arrest, and they not only arrested her, they managed to successfully extradite her to Illinois. Lily was then put into state care and placed in the home of Stephen's sister in October 2016. Jennifer then entered a custody battle, not really with Stephen's family, but with the state. A hearing was held to determine if keeping Lily from her grandparents was enough justification to remove Lily from Jennifer's care. Jennifer knew she had to fight to get Lily back, so one of the things she did was quickly break things off with her fiancé, who was actually facing fraud charges for something entirely unrelated. But that was definitely not a good look, and Jennifer's only focus at this point was getting Lily back. Jennifer said in court that she only left Illinois because people blamed her for Stephen's murder and she was being harassed. She claimed she tried to arrange visits with Stephen's mother, Penny, both in Florida and in Illinois, but Penny denied that ever happened. She didn't even know Jennifer was in Florida initially. The only time she talked to Jennifer about visits was when she had a scheduled visit in 2010 with Lily, shortly after getting visitation rights. She then received a text from Jennifer that said, "Gone out of state. You can come visit if you want to." The text did not say what state she was in. Beyond that, Penny never had Jennifer's new phone number. She had her mother Deborah's number, which is what she called, until that got disconnected. Penny even hired a PI to find them, and why in the world would she have done that if Jennifer was allowing visits? Jennifer set up a GoFundMe for her legal expenses, and she actually put out some of her story there. It's the first time since Stephen's murder that she said what happened. She wrote that she and Lily were in a bedroom and Stephen was coming after her. Writing about what Shirley did, Jennifer said, quote, "Knowing that he would come and kill me, she grabbed a gun and fired one warning shot, which happened to hit him in the back of the head. This was an act of self-defense," end quote. In court and in the GoFundMe, Jennifer said her former in-laws were free to see Lily in Florida. And in an interview with the media, Jennifer said it had been on her mind shortly before her arrest to make sure a visit happened, but she was arrested before she could get them set up. After 6 years of no visits, she was suddenly ready to do it, but wouldn't you know, they arrested her before she could. No matter how this was twisted, it's pretty clear that Jennifer was keeping Lily from her grandparents. Now, the question was this enough to rule that Lily, who was well cared for otherwise, had been neglected by Jennifer? And the judge said she had been. Not only was it neglect to prevent her from knowing her father's family, Jennifer put herself in a position to be arrested for disobeying the court order, and that arrest would have a negative impact on Lily. Now, this is not what we usually see in a neglect case. When we hear the reporting that says simply that Lily was removed from the home due to neglect, it paints a picture in our minds that is not entirely accurate. Aside from the custody issue, Jennifer was more or less taking good care of her. Because this case was not about outright abuse and severe neglect, it seemed to always be a case where Jennifer would get Lily back once she completed the things the court asked of her, like going to counseling sessions, and hopefully she learned her lesson about following court orders. The judge told her she was in the driver's seat with this. Once she got her counseling and had a plan for how she was going to not defy the court order in the future, Lily would be returned. And initially, that is what Lily wanted as well. She wanted to move back with her mother. But then after a few months in her aunt's care, she changed her mind. She expressed this to a number of people, including her therapist and her guardian ad litem. The supervised visits she had with her mom had not gone as smoothly as everyone hoped for. Lily told her therapist that Jennifer would whisper things in her ear and promise her things in her, quote, lying voice. There were also notes from the visitation supervisor who had to intervene with both Jennifer and her mother over things they said to Lily. With Jennifer, it was mostly just bringing up what would happen when Lily came home and how she would decorate her room and things like that. She was told by the supervisor not to bring up reunification at the visits. This is such an uncertain time for kids, and it's best to just keep conversations in the present. Jennifer's mother, Deborah, went a step further. She did talk to Lily about coming home, but then during an August 2017 visit, Deborah told Lily to be careful with what she told the judge because it could hurt what happened between her and her mom. The visitation supervisor again had to intervene and tell her to stop saying things like that. Lily's counselor told the court that the visits were becoming a source of stress for Lily because she was becoming aware of the ongoing manipulation coming from her mother. It was causing her feelings of anger, sadness, and distrust. The counselor said Lily had been consistent since February of 2017, after 4 months with her aunt and uncle, that she wanted to stay with them and that she didn't feel safe with her mother. Lily had also told the guardian ad litem that her mom told her to say things like she was forced to sleep on the floor and to cry at night and beg her aunt to go home. Now, when asked directly about this, Jennifer said she didn't know why Lily had told him those things. Jennifer said she simply prayed with Lily that they would be together again, and she did everything the state asked of her. She went to counseling, and according to her counselor, she was making progress. She was starting to see things from another point of view and understand how her choices led her to where she was. She said in court that she had hurt people that were sitting there right then, her daughter the most, and she was doing everything she could to fix it. Jennifer wanted custody back, but the state was looking to actually restrict her visits more. The judge decided to leave Lily with her aunt for the time being, but not to restrict Jennifer's visits, and he suggested that Jennifer consult with her attorney. The custody battle would end in August of 2017 when they reached an agreement. Lily would stay where she was, but Jennifer would still retain parental rights and have the right to visitation. It turned this from a kinship foster placement to a private guardianship arrangement, and finally gave Lily the stability she deserved. Now, as for Shirley Skinner, after her appeals failed, she started asking for clemency, with the first request coming in late 2014. She cited her poor health as the primary reason she should be shown mercy so she could go home and be with her family. Her new attorney also said it should be considered that her trial attorney had advised her poorly. The self-defense argument was the stronger of the two defenses, but he went with a different strategy. Now, a failed trial strategy does not mean your attorney was incompetent, and it may not be enough for an appeal. It could be considered in a clemency argument. Stephen's family responded, recognizing Shirley's age and poor health, but noted that those things existed when she killed Stephen. So it's kind of hard to argue she wasn't a risk to the public. Not just that, she wanted a mercy that she did not give to their son. Clemency in 2014 was denied. And though she was sick at the time she appealed, Shirley is, as of this recording 9.5 years later, still alive and still incarcerated at the age of 89. Some of Shirley's family still believes she should be released because this was self-defense. Her son still thinks she didn't do it. The Watkins family, however, thinks she is right where she belongs. Stephen's family did start an online petition a few years ago to ask the governor to deny Shirley's ongoing clemency attempts. I don't know how you, as a listener, feel about geriatric inmates and attempts at clemency under those conditions, or really how you feel about this case. I like to mostly lay out the case and let people make up their own minds rather than inserting my opinion all the time, because we all have our own life experiences and value systems that we use when we make our decisions on how we feel about things. If after hearing all of this, you do object to clemency for Shirley Skinner, I will leave a link to the Watkins family petition in the show notes. Thank you for listening. If you want more content, check out my other show, Crimelines and Consequences, wherever you get your podcasts. I also offer bonus content and ad-free listening at patreon.com/crimelines or through the Apple Podcast app. If you want to buy me a coffee, the official drink of Crimelines, you can give a one-time donation at basementfourproductions.com/support.